Hey guys, welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about interview tips, how I handled my interview, and what the interviews were like. My first interview was at Lincoln Memorial University in Tennessee. They have multiple mini interviews, so it was structured where they would have 3 different questions and I would have to answer those 3 different questions. Typically they were scenario based. So if your school does the Casper exam, it's basically another type of Casper. I had my interview scheduled for 9 o'clock and it was over Zoom, as most schools are doing nowadays. So it was over Zoom, and I had reserved an interview room at the Career Services at my undergrad. That is something to look into if you don't know about it. Like, contact Career Services to see if they have an interview room, or maybe reserve an office in another building or something so you have a professional background. So I went and I scheduled my interview time for 8:30 to 10:30. The interview was only going to be 30 minutes, but they want you to get on 15 minutes before, and I wanted to make sure that I was in the room 30 minutes before so then I could de-stress, make sure I had everything just in case. So for my interview, in order to prep, I spent the weekend before, as my interview was on a Monday, I spent the weekend before asking myself questions, answering them, talking through scenarios with friends and family on how I would handle things in the vet world. With this, I would write down some answers or specific opportunities that, like, I was presented with a difficult client, or just something with, like, working in a workplace environment and how I could relate to that type of scenario if it was asked to me. So that is how I prepped for the interview. But when it came to the day of, I made sure that I had a notebook in hand so that I could jot down some questions, or like I had questions for the interview committee, because it's always important to have questions. They really want to know that you're interested in their school. So I had my notebook and I had my questions that I had thought of for their school before the interview time, and then I also had a pencil and paper so that I could quickly write down my thoughts. Because in a multiple mini interview scenario, they give you the prompt, and it's typically a paragraph, and then they give you 2 minutes to read it and then process it, and then you have 2 minutes to answer it, and then whatever remaining minute is left per little multiple mini interview, then you have that time to ask your question. So they would ask me a question, and then I would write it down, or write down my answers. I didn't write it down. I wrote down my response to it, and it was just to, like, put it out on paper instead of just sitting there and staring at the screen as I was reading it. So that, like, I was jotting down my thoughts, and when my 2 minutes were up, or if I was, like, done quicker than the 2 minutes, I would say, okay, I'm ready. And then the guy or the girl would, like, respond to me, and then I would respond to the question. The only hiccup I had with this is one of the scenarios, I had absolutely no idea what it was. Like, I was at such a loss, but that is where I pulled, like, morals and common sense from working in vet med, and I applied it to a situation that I was uncertain of, which is going to happen in vet med. You don't know what's going to walk through those double doors or single door at your clinic that day. Like, you don't know. So, like, being on your toes and being able to think in an interview is very important. So as much as you can prep all you want, like, you genuinely don't know what an interview committee is going to ask. So the one question that threw me off guard, I wrote down some thoughts on how I was going to answer it, and I answered it, and thank goodness my interviewer, like, moved on right after I finished it, and he asked me if I had any questions, and that's where I got to deliver my questions for the school, as I was interested in their large animal program, and then just how they work with sending their students out for their 4th year, because Lincoln Memorial doesn't have a teaching hospital, so they send them to different clinics, which is really cool because you get to go to different clinics to get your different experience, and it's super hands-on experience. Something that is very important to consider is they do not want you to talk about the questions that you get asked in an interview at all. Like for Lincoln Memorial, they put a little disclaimer on each photo, and it was like, or on each statement, and it was like, you promise to not share the information from this question. So just like make sure that you're following those rules, and then just not copying down the question or anything else. And be very respectful in the interview. Like when I was answering the questions, I told them, I was like, I'm gonna look down and work on my thoughts before each question, and they understood. They were fine with that, because that's something that they encourage, is they want you to write down your thoughts in response to the question, so then you're more prepared for it. Now with my Auburn interview, that is a whole different story. So with my Auburn interview, I got the call on December 12th or 15th or maybe it was the 17th. It was that week I got the call or the email that I was going to be invited to interview, and it was between these 2-week period in February and January, like around that time of when they were interviewing. And so I had the interview scheduled for 9 o'clock. However, I didn't know that I had scheduled it in the wrong time zone. So make sure when you are scheduling your interview that you can like make sure you're in the right time zone, or you know what time zone you're in, or just like anything. Because the morning of my interview, I woke up out of a dead sleep at 5 o'clock in the morning because I had a dream that I was an hour late for my interview. And I didn't understand why I would be an hour late. Like, this is Auburn interview. This is the important, like, stressful one that I've been prepping for a week here. So I woke up and I'm like looking through the email, and I don't know why I decided to look through the email, but I looked through it and I noticed that it said, I think it was Eastern time, because I'm in Central time right now, and it said Eastern time. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that means it's an hour ahead. Or like, I was thinking maybe, okay, even though I scheduled it there, it's still gonna be the time here, because what if I scheduled it for 10 o'clock there, so then it's 9 o'clock? No, it was 9 o'clock Eastern time, which meant that it was 8 o'clock my time. And so I was supposed to go to the interview room that I used for Lincoln Memorial, except for when I found out that my interview time had moved an hour before, the place wasn't even open for me to get in 10 minutes before, because they specifically said you had to be there 10 minutes before. So I'm like freaking out at 5 o'clock in the morning, and thankfully my roommate gets up early, and I'm just like, I need for you to proofread this email. Like, are you sure that it's this time? Everything ended up fine. I got into a professional background at one of my professors' office, who was willing to donate her office to me for 30 minutes to do this interview. And I'll talk about the interview process for that and how it all went in a second. But first I want to talk about how I prepped for that interview. Prepping, meaning like I should have known what time it was. So for prepping for the Auburn interview, this one I was like extremely stressed for. With Lincoln Memorial, it was so early, and I found out that it was going to be for the spring semester of acceptance. I actually don't know if I knew that I was being interviewed for the spring. But I came back to school, all of a sudden I was getting an interview, and I had no idea what was happening. And so I prepped for the weekend, and I did mock interview with one of my professors. I did a mock interview with career services, because they have a list of like potential interview questions for vet school, and they were helping me like just answer the question and how was my etiquette on Zoom and everything else. So like with Lincoln Memorial, I prepped, but it was nothing like the Auburn interview. Like Auburn, I started prepping a week in advance. I was going through this huge list of questions, possible questions, writing my answers down, and I was handwriting it all because I like wanted it to stick. I was calling people on their drives home so then we can discuss topics in vet med. So then like it was just refreshing my mind and stuff. And then I had a mock interview with my professor again, but this time it was more like let's get some questions out here. And honestly, one of my hardest questions was, why do you want to be a vet? And that one, like, they don't want you to answer it for your personal statement, but they want you to answer it in your interview. And just like, yeah, it was just, it's a hard question for some people. So anyways, I prepped for a week in advance, and then on Monday morning, I had the whole situation with almost missing my interview. But I made it to the interview, and I was sitting in the office, and I was in Zoom, and one of the things that I did do was have the career services do a Zoom interview with me so that I could practice eye contact to the camera. It is very important that you make eye contact to the camera, because while you're talking, you can talk to the camera lens and they're gonna think, the interview committee is like, they're making eye contact with you basically. So I got into the interview, they put us in a waiting room, and then we got put into our breakout rooms where I got interviewed by 3 people. They asked a series of questions, and to be honest, I'm not sure if I can disclose any of the questions that Auburn asked me, so I'm just gonna play the safe route and just not say what they were, and then maybe I'll make another video in the future of what they were if it's acceptable. But they asked me a series of questions, and I answered the first one completely fine. I was like, we can do this. The second one, it was a fine question, but it was like, my mind finally realized where we were, and it was like, oh my gosh, like, this is the Auburn interview, like, we can't mess this up. And my heart started racing. I could hear it in my ears, like, it was pounding. It was, oh my gosh, it was like, why are we freaking out now? We don't need to freak out now. And so I was like, as I was talking, I was working on calming myself down, because I was like, no, this is not a time for us to freak out over this. Like, we know how to answer these questions. We've been prepping for this interview for honestly years, because it's just, you got to get good at answering these questions and knowing the morals of vet med. And so we got to the end, and they asked me if I had any questions for them, and it was very important for you to ask questions at the end of your interview if they ask that. Make sure you have questions. Be interested in their school. And so I had a list of questions, and honestly, I fumbled over my question, and I felt so embarrassed, but they didn't second guess it. And at one point in my interview, we started talking about forensics and forensic TV shows and stuff, and it was supposed to be super structured, but then something I said left us on a rabbit hole to go somewhere else. So it was a very personable, relaxed interview, and it was really nice. And I laughed, I smiled, I made some jokes. I was myself in the interview, and I was who I'm going to be in vet med, and I think that's really important. Well, I finished my interview, and I walked out of the office, and I was like, I was myself? Why was I myself? And my professor's like, that's good. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have smiled. I was attacking every little thing that I did in the interview. It was the worst thing ever. But then I was like, honestly, I couldn't have done anything different. That was who I was in that interview. And so I went home, I celebrated that I finally was done with the interview, because at that point I had been prepping for a week. I was exhausted. Answering vet med questions for a week, I was like, oh my goodness. I want to get the interview over with, because the stress of waiting for that interview was just a lot. And then the next step was just waiting for acceptance or rejection or waitlisted or anything at that point. Which, honestly, I handled that waiting way better than waiting for the interview thing. So now let's talk about what I wore in my interviews. So both interviews were over Zoom, but that didn't mean that I wanted to like dress down in any way. It's very important to wear professional dress for your interviews and to have a professional background. Now, I had an irrational fear that they were going to make me stand up in my interview to see if I was like wearing professional wear all the way down and not just the pajama pants and the nice top. And so I made sure that I was like decked out with this professional wear. So I did my hair, I did my makeup, and I made sure I had nice shoes on. Like, I was ready for the irrational fear test that they were gonna make me stand up, do a twirl, and show my outfit. So I was ready for that. But with all that being said, it also made me feel confident. So wear something that makes you feel confident, is very respectful, and that you can present yourself for who you want to be and just be in a professional environment with your mindset and just where you're at. And so I wore a black suit for one of them with a white shirt. It was super simple with a like little dainty necklace, and I didn't have a bunch of rings on because I do talk with my hands in case you can't tell. But I was very simple. I had my hair down, and it's very important to have your hair in a, like, you want it to be comfortable. Like, you don't want to touch your hair all the time and be stressed about it, or like, is it falling in the right place? Like, make sure it's comfortable and just relax and that you don't even have to think about it. So I did that setup, but then when it came to my Auburn interview, I actually wore a blue suit with a white shirt, and it was another suit that like I felt very confident in. And I don't think I wore a necklace because honestly that whole morning I was just like, but I wore like simple stuff. I had very minimal makeup on, which is just normal for me anyways. So it was nothing different. It was just me dressing nicely. So make sure that you do find professional dress and you feel confident and it's comfortable. You want to be comfortable in your interview and not be thinking about babysitting your clothes or just making sure that it looks okay. Like, you just want to be comfortable in your interview setting. With all that being said, it was a super successful interview for both schools. I got accepted to both, and it wasn't a stressful time in the interview. So make sure that you're not stressed when you're going into it and that you have prepped enough so that you can confidently answer why you want to be in vet med as a veterinarian. Thank you guys for watching this video. I've truly enjoyed reminiscing on my interview experiences with both Lincoln Memorial and Auburn University, and I can't wait to share more of my journey with you guys in the future. Please subscribe and like this video if you'd like to see more.